Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if September 11th never happened. You stretch awake on September 11th, 2001, sunlight streaming through your bedroom window. Across America, flight attendants complete routine safety demonstrations on 4 aircraft bound for Los Angeles and San Francisco. You grab your morning coffee, completely unaware that in another timeline, this Tuesday would reshape civilization. The Twin Towers gleam in Manhattan's morning light as office workers settle into their desks. You probably won't survive realizing how drastically different your world could have been with just 4 flights landing safely. In airports nationwide, passengers breeze through security, shoes firmly on their feet, water bottles in hand. You flip through morning news covering Bush's education policies and the latest celebrity gossip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. The Pentagon continues its routine operations while the Capitol building stands untouched by fear. You finish breakfast as America's sense of invincibility remains perfectly intact. Flight 11, Flight 175, Flight 77, and Flight 93 maintain their scheduled courses toward peaceful landings. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You arrive at the airport in this alternate 2001, where security feels more like a friendly greeting than an interrogation. Loved ones walk you to the gate, sharing final hugs and kisses before your departure. You slip off your jacket but keep your shoes firmly planted as you stroll through metal detectors. Your full water bottle passes inspection without a second glance from board security personnel. Children run excitedly through terminals while grandparents wave from restaurant windows overlooking the tarmac. You board planes where cockpit doors remain unlocked, pilots occasionally chatting with curious passengers. Flight attendants focus on comfort rather than scanning for suspicious behavior among travelers. You witness airport bars serving passengers right up until boarding time without security concerns. Carry-on luggage restrictions remain minimal as you pack scissors, nail clippers, and liquids freely. Your fellow passengers joke and laugh without the underlying tension that would define future air travel. You experience the golden age of flying where trust, not fear, governs aviation security protocols. Airport employees smile genuinely as they process thousands of passengers through streamlined, efficient checkpoints. You settle into your seat knowing that air travel remains America's safest, most relaxed transportation method. The friendly skies truly feel friendly as pilots announce clear weather and on-time arrivals. You watch President Bush focus his entire political capital on compassionate conservatism and domestic reform. Social Security privatization dominates headlines as Bush pushes his signature policy without wartime distractions. You witness heated congressional debates over education funding rather than military authorization votes. The No Child Left Behind Act receives full presidential attention and comprehensive bipartisan support. You observe Bush's approval ratings hovering around 50%, lacking any rally around the flag effect. Immigration reform takes center stage as Bush courts Latino voters with guest worker programs. You experience political discourse focused on tax cuts, healthcare, and economic growth strategies. Environmental policies receive unexpected attention as Bush faces pressure without national security excuses. You watch the president travel domestically, visiting schools and community centers rather than military bases. Faith-based initiatives expand significantly as Bush channels his evangelical base toward social programs. You witness Supreme Court nominations debated purely on judicial philosophy rather than terrorism responses. Campaign finance reform advances through Congress without competing against counterterrorism legislation priorities. You observe a presidency defined by policy wonkishness rather than wartime leadership demands. Bush's Texas swagger focuses on domestic challenges as America turns inward on local issues. You experience the luxury of political debates about Medicare prescription drug benefits and energy independence. You maintain your digital privacy as the Patriot Act never materializes in congressional discussions. Your phone calls, emails, and internet browsing remain free from government surveillance programs. You visit libraries where reading habits stay private, and librarians never face national security letters. Banking transactions proceed normally without suspicious activity reports, triggering federal investigations. You travel domestically without enhanced background checks or watch list screenings at every checkpoint. Civil liberties organizations focus on traditional issues rather than combating massive surveillance expansion. You experience law enforcement operating under existing constitutional constraints without emergency powers. Your personal data remains protected by Fourth Amendment protections that continue operating normally. You witness no secret courts approving warrantless wiretaps or metadata collection programs. Journalists report freely without fearing prosecution under expanded espionage laws or shield law erosion. You maintain anonymity online as internet service providers resist pressure for backdoor surveillance access. Privacy advocates concentrate on corporate data mining rather than defending against government overreach. You experience democracy functioning with transparent institutions and accountable intelligence agencies. Constitutional scholars debate abstract principles rather than emergency detention powers and torture legality. Your rights remain intact as America avoids the slippery slope of trading freedom for security. You live in a society where civil liberties expand rather than contract under government pressure. You witness America's military interventions taking completely different paths without the war on terror framework. Afghanistan remains under Taliban control as the Northern Alliance fights alone without American support. You observe Osama bin Laden continuing to operate from his mountain strongholds, planning future attacks. Iraq stays under Saddam Hussein's brutal dictatorship as weapons of mass destruction claims never emerge. You watch America potentially intervening in different African conflicts or humanitarian crises instead. The Darfur genocide receives immediate American attention without Middle Eastern military commitments competing for resources. You experience debates about intervening in North Korea's nuclear program with full military focus available. Russian aggression in Chechnya faces stronger American condemnation without diplomatic energy diverted elsewhere. You witness China's military expansion proceeding unchecked as American focus remains scattered globally. Iran's nuclear program advances faster without the deterrent effect of American forces surrounding their borders. You observe European allies maintaining different relationships without shared counterterrorism mission bonds. Military contractors focus on different weapons systems without improvised explosive device countermeasures driving innovation. You experience Pentagon planning centered on conventional state versus state warfare rather than asymmetric conflicts. Veterans' hospitals treat different injuries as roadside bombs, and combat stress never dominate casualty statistics. You witness defense spending allocated toward traditional threats rather than homeland security infrastructure. You experience sustained economic prosperity as the tech boom continues its meteoric rise without interruption. The dot-com bubble never bursts dramatically, instead deflating gradually through natural market corrections. You witness real estate markets climbing steadily without the artificial stimulus of post-attack interest rate cuts. Defense spending remains focused on traditional military needs rather than exploding homeland security budgets. You observe hundreds of billions redirected from counterterrorism toward education, healthcare, and infrastructure investment. The airline industry thrives without massive bailouts, security costs, or passenger reluctance affecting profitability. You experience insurance markets operating normally without terrorism risk premiums driving up business costs. Wall Street continues its upward trajectory without the shock that triggered massive Federal Reserve interventions. You witness venture capital flowing freely into innovation rather than security-focused defensive technologies. Tourism industries flourish as international travel faces no security-related barriers or cultural hesitations. You observe New York City's economy booming without reconstruction costs and lower Manhattan business relocations. Small businesses avoid the regulatory burden of enhanced security compliance and employee background checks. You experience consumer confidence remaining high without terrorism. Fears dampening spending and investment patterns. Federal budgets focus on social programs as war expenditures never drain trillions from domestic priorities. You witness America investing in the future rather than spending defensively on past trauma responses. You live in a society where Islamophobia never becomes a mainstream political force or cultural phenomenon. Muslim Americans continue integrating naturally without facing systematic discrimination or suspicious government monitoring. You witness mosques being built without community protests, zoning battles, or vandalism targeting Islamic institutions. Arabic names and Islamic practices remain unremarkable in schools, workplaces, and public accommodations. You observe interfaith dialogue proceeding organically rather than as defensive damage control against rising prejudice. Immigration policies stay focused on economic concerns rather than religious or ethnic profiling systems. You experience multiculturalism as a celebrated strength rather than a contested political battleground. Hate crime statistics against Muslims remain at baseline levels without the dramatic spike that scarred communities. You witness Islamic art, culture, and scholarship flourishing in American universities and cultural institutions. Middle Eastern restaurants, cultural centers, and businesses operate without security concerns or boycott threats. You observe children growing up without associating Islam with violence or viewing Muslims as potential threats. Religious freedom debates center on traditional church-state separation rather than Islamic accommodation controversies. You experience American foreign policy discussions focusing on strategic interests rather than civilizational clash narratives. Media representation of Muslims remains diverse and nuanced without the monolithic terrorist stereotype dominating coverage. You witness America maintaining its melting pot identity without the fracturing that fear and suspicion created. You experience social media's early development without the anxieties and surveillance culture that shaped its evolution. MySpace and Friendster flourish as platforms purely focused on connection rather than content moderation and security screening. You witness the birth of Facebook as a college networking tool without immediate pressure for identity verification systems. Online communities develop organically around shared interests rather than being monitored for extremist recruitment patterns. You observe tech companies innovating freely without government partnerships in data collection and user surveillance programs. Early YouTube emerges as a creative platform without algorithms designed to detect and remove violent content. You experience digital communication tools developing with privacy as a fundamental design principle rather than afterthought. Tech entrepreneurs focus on user experience and engagement rather than building backdoors for law enforcement access. You witness the smartphone revolution proceeding without location tracking justified by national security emergency powers. Online gaming communities thrive without concerns about terrorist coordination or radicalization through virtual environments. You observe digital payment systems like PayPal growing without enhanced money laundering detection and reporting requirements. Social networking develops trust-based verification rather than government-mandated identity confirmation processes. You experience the early internet's libertarian ethos continuing without the security versus privacy debates dominating policy. Technology companies remain primarily accountable to users and shareholders rather than national security apparatus integration. You witness innovation proceeding at its natural pace without defensive security considerations slowing development and deployment. You observe America maintaining its soft power diplomacy while other global powers reshape international relations differently. NATO continues focusing on European security rather than expanding into counterterrorism and Middle Eastern operations. You witness China's economic rise proceeding even faster without American attention diverted by Middle Eastern conflicts. Russia under Putin consolidates power more aggressively without the distraction of American military commitments elsewhere. You experience European-American relations following traditional patterns rather than being tested by controversial war coalitions. The United Nations remains more relevant as America doesn't bypass multilateral institutions for unilateral military action. You observe India's rise as a global power, accelerating without competition from American attention in Afghanistan. Middle Eastern oil politics operate under different dynamics without American military presence destabilizing regional balance. You witness Latin American relations developing normally rather than being overshadowed by security and counterterrorism concerns. International law evolves differently without precedents set by detention policies, drone strikes, and enhanced interrogation debates. You experience global trade flowing more freely without security-related shipping delays, inspections, and port restrictions. Cultural exchange programs flourish without visa restrictions, and security screening dampening international educational cooperation. You observe climate change negotiations proceeding without energy security arguments, complicating environmental diplomacy discussions. Nuclear non-proliferation efforts face different challenges without the Iraq WMD intelligence failure undermining inspection credibility. You witness America's global reputation remaining stronger without the controversies that damaged international standing and trust. You find yourself in 2025, 24 years after that Tuesday morning when 4 planes landed safely. The political landscape looks radically different as America never experienced its defining generational trauma and response. You observe presidential candidates discussing healthcare, climate change, and economic inequality without national security dominating every debate. Social movements focus on traditional civil rights issues rather than defending constitutional protections eroded by emergency powers. You witness young adults who grew up without the constant background hum of terror alerts and security theater. International students flock to American universities without visa restrictions, cultural suspicions, or diplomatic tensions complicating education. You experience cities where public spaces remain open and accessible without concrete barriers, metal detectors, and surveillance cameras. The Supreme Court's jurisprudence evolved differently without cases involving detention, surveillance, and executive war powers shaping constitutional law. You observe a generation of veterans who served in different conflicts with different injuries and different homecoming experiences. American Islam developed naturally as a religious community, rather than being forced into defensive postures and public relations battles. You witness technology companies that prioritized user privacy and innovation over government cooperation and security compliance requirements. Foreign policy debates center on economic competition, climate cooperation, and traditional diplomatic challenges rather than counterterrorism strategies. You live in an America that remained confident in its values rather than testing them against existential security threats. This alternate timeline reveals how profoundly one morning's events shaped the world you actually inhabit today. You close your eyes and imagine the weight of this alternate reality settling over your understanding. The world you actually inhabit carries the invisible scars of that September morning in countless ways. Every airport security line, every government surveillance program, every foreign policy decision bears its fingerprint. You realize how one event's absence could have preserved America's pre-millennium optimism and global standing. The butterfly effect ripples through decades, touching everything from social media algorithms to Supreme Court precedents. You contemplate whether this alternate America would have faced different challenges or simply delayed inevitable reckonings. Perhaps climate change would have received earlier attention without security distractions competing for resources and focus. Maybe social inequality would have been addressed more directly without national unity rhetoric masking domestic problems. You wonder if America's democratic institutions would have remained stronger without the stress tests of emergency powers. This thought experiment reveals how profoundly trauma shapes nations, just as it shapes individuals and families. You return to your own timeline, carrying new appreciation for paths not taken and choices unmade. The question lingers. Would a world without 9/11 have been better? Or would different crises have emerged to test us? What do you think? Would America have been stronger without its defining trauma? Or do we need our trials to discover who we really are?